Today, we're going to attempt the top speed of the Veyron and go faster than I've ever gone before.
And in order to do this top speed, the Bugatti needs a very specific list of things.
Get in! Got top speed mode!
Which proved to be a lot harder than I first thought.
Most people would have walked away from this Bugatti Veyron the moment they saw it. Repossessed, badly damaged, missing critical parts, and already written off as a lost cause. It looked beyond saving. But Mat Armstrong saw something different. A challenge nobody else was willing to take on. What followed was months of setbacks, impossible repairs, and a handmade replacement for Bugatti's legendary speed key, all building toward one final test that ended in complete disaster. So what actually went wrong, and was this rebuild ever really finished? In this video, we'll walk through the entire journey, the hidden engineering, the workarounds nobody expected, and the ending nobody saw coming. A broken Bugatti, an impossible mission. When Mat Armstrong first laid eyes on the Bugatti Veyron that would consume the next several months of his life, it did not look like a machine capable of 253 miles per hour. It looked like a casualty. The car had been repossessed, taken from a previous owner, and left to sit, its bodywork scarred, its systems neglected, its future uncertain. For most people, a Veyron in this condition would have ended up parted out, its components scattered across a dozen different garages, its identity erased piece by piece. But Armstrong is not most people.
Just enjoy the Bugatti Veyron. It's in pieces, and in the last video on the main channel, we actually figured out why the car weren't going into gear, and it was down to a fuse.
And he saw something in the wreckage still worth saving. The scope of what needed doing was enormous. This was not a car that needed a fresh coat of paint and a wash. It needed to be rebuilt from the inside out. Large sections of the Veyron's structure required attention. Damaged components had to be sourced, repaired, or replaced entirely. A task made harder by a simple, brutal fact. Bugatti does not manufacture spare parts the way ordinary car makers do. Every panel, every fitting, every piece of trim on a Veyron exists in vanishingly small numbers, and finding them, let alone affording them, is a battle all its own. Armstrong refreshed the car's exterior panel by panel, working to erase the visible scars of its previous life. And in doing so, he made a decision that would come to define the rebuilt car's identity, swapping the Veyron's original light blue accents for a satin metallic silver finish. It was a small choice in the grand scheme of the project, but it mattered enormously. This was no longer simply a repaired Veyron. It was becoming Armstrong's Veyron, reshaped in his own image, carrying his fingerprints across every inch of its bodywork. But cosmetic repairs were always going to be the easy part. Isn't it always the things you cannot see that cause the most trouble? Underneath the fresh paint and reworked panels sat a car with problems running far deeper than skin, problems that would take months to fully understand, let alone resolve. The Veyron is not a simple machine. In many ways, it behaves closer to an aircraft than a car. A web of interlocking systems built around quadruple turbochargers, an all-wheel drive system engineered to handle close to 800 horsepower, and a network of electronics so dense that a single fault can cascade into a dozen others. Rebuilding a machine like this is not simply a matter of bolting parts back together. It is an act of translation, learning to read a car that was never designed to be easily understood by anyone outside Bugatti's own engineering teams. Every fault code, every warning light, every strange noise had to be interpreted, argued over, and traced back to its source. And looming over all of it was one final obstacle, the one piece of the puzzle that no amount of bodywork or mechanical repair could solve on its own. The Veyron's most famous and most mysterious feature was still locked away, completely out of reach. Because the Veyron does not simply let its driver press the accelerator and see what happens. Its true top speed, the number that made it a legend in the first place, sits behind a system so deliberately restrictive that even owning the car outright does not guarantee access to it. And that locked door was about to become the single biggest challenge of the entire rebuild.
There's got to be a problem further down the line.
And also the car still has a misfire along with loads of other problems, and it's going to get even harder now.
There is something almost poetic about a car this powerful, being held back not by physics, but by a piece of Bugatti's own bureaucracy. A safeguard built into the machine itself, as if the engineers who designed it never fully trusted anyone, including the people who would eventually own it, to be ready for what it could do. Every hour Armstrong spent under the hood was, in a sense, an argument he was making to the car itself, that he had earned the right to finally see what it could really do. The one thing money couldn't buy. Every Bugatti Veyron ships with a secret hidden in plain sight. A feature so exclusive that Bugatti built an entire physical ritual around unlocking it. To access the car's true top speed, a driver cannot simply select a mode from a menu or flick a switch on the dashboard. They need a separate, dedicated speed key, a small piece of hardware that, when inserted, lowers the Veyron's body closer to the ground, retracts its front splitter, raises its rear wing into an aggressive high-speed position, and unlocks the engine's full potential. Without that key, the Veyron is capped well below its legendary number, a caged version of itself, no matter how much money or mechanical skill has gone into rebuilding it. For Armstrong, this presented an immediate problem. A repossessed car rarely comes with every accessory intact, and the speed key, small, easily lost, and treated by Bugatti almost like a piece of jewelry rather than a spare part, was nowhere to be found. Without it, months of bodywork and mechanical repair would count for nothing. The Veyron could be rebuilt to a flawless standard and still never reach the speed that made it famous in the first place. It is a strange kind of irony. Rebuilding an engine capable of producing close to 800 horsepower, only to be stopped by something as small and unassuming as a missing key. But that is precisely the position Armstrong found himself in. All the mechanical skill in the world rendered irrelevant by a single missing piece of hardware, one that Bugatti had never intended to be easily replaced. The obvious solution, going back to Bugatti and asking for a replacement, was never going to be simple. Should a manufacturer be expected to simply hand over the key to its most exclusive, most dangerous capability to anyone who asks? Bugatti clearly did not think so. Getting an official replacement meant navigating a process built for caution rather than speed, one that offered no guarantee of a quick answer, and, quite possibly, no answer that Armstrong could afford or accept on the timeline he needed. So he took a different route entirely. Rather than wait on Bugatti's terms, Armstrong turned to an auto locksmith, a specialist in exactly the kind of mechanical puzzle the speed key represented. After close examination, the team determined that the system relied on a comparatively simple mechanical key rather than some impenetrable piece of proprietary electronics. It was intricate, yes, precise, certainly, but not impossible to replicate with the right tools and the right expertise. What followed was a process of trial, measurement, and careful fabrication.
Bugatti have come through. Bugatti Manchester called us back. We've got an answer. I don't know whether it's good or not. Do you know all these problems as well? Like, if 2, 3, 4 years ago you told me to have these problems, I would have snapped your hand off to have this problem because it's absolutely unreal. But I think just the expectation.
Cutting a key from scratch that would need to interface perfectly with a locking mechanism designed decades ago by one of the most secretive engineering teams in the automotive world. There was no manual for this, no official diagram to follow, just careful observation, a willingness to experiment, and the stubbornness to keep trying until it worked. The result was something almost symbolic in its own right. A homemade answer to a problem Bugatti itself had made deliberately difficult to solve. It represented everything the rebuild had come to stand for. Where official channels offered delay and uncertainty, Armstrong and his team offered persistence and craftsmanship. The key that would eventually unlock the Veyron's full potential was not the one Bugatti had originally provided. It was one built by hand, out of necessity, by people who refused to let a locked door end the story before it had really begun. Why should a locked mechanism be allowed to decide whether months of honest, careful work ever gets to mean anything? That question seemed to hang over the entire process, unspoken but obvious in every measurement taken and every test fitting attempted. There was no guarantee it would work, no way to know, until the moment it was finally tried, whether hours of careful fabrication had actually solved the problem or simply produced a very convincing piece of metal. And there was something almost fitting about the solution itself. A car built by one of the most secretive, most exclusive manufacturers in the world, ultimately unlocked not by that manufacturer at all, but by an independent craftsman working with nothing more than patience, precision, and a refusal to accept that a missing key had to mean the end of the road. But having a key, it turned out, was only the beginning. The car still had to agree to work. One gremlin after another. A rebuild of this scale was never going to be a straight line from broken to perfect, and the Veyron seemed determined to prove that at every possible opportunity. Almost as soon as one problem was solved, another emerged to take its place. Each new fault threatening to undo weeks of painstaking progress. What is a hypercar rebuild, really, if not a negotiation with a machine that has every incentive to keep saying no? The gearbox was among the first major hurdles. The Veyron relies on a direct shift gearbox.
I bought this repossessed Bugatti Veyron with supposedly a broken gearbox.
Under enormous internal pressure, a system that has to manage the violent output of a quadruple turbocharged engine without missing a beat. Pressure irregularities in a system like this are not a minor inconvenience. They are warning signs of a component under strain, and diagnosing them meant hours spent testing, adjusting, and testing again, searching for a pattern in numbers that refuse to stay consistent. There is no room for guesswork in a gearbox built to handle this much force. A single unresolved pressure issue, left unaddressed, could mean catastrophic failure the moment real speed was finally asked of the car. An outcome far worse than a delayed timeline or a frustrated afternoon in the garage. Then came the electrical gremlins, the kind of faults that seem to exist purely to frustrate the people chasing them. Wiring looms that have sat dormant inside a repossessed car for years do not always take kindly to being brought back to life, and the Veyron's electronics are so deeply interconnected that a single corroded connector or a single degraded wire can manifest as an entirely unrelated symptom somewhere else in the car. Chasing an electrical fault in a machine like this often means retracing the same circuits over and over, refusing to accept a guess when only certainty will do. A blown fuse knocked out the car's indicators entirely, a problem simple in isolation but symbolic of a larger truth, that a car this complex has almost no small problems, only small symptoms of larger ones waiting to be uncovered. Around the same time, a persistent engine misfire began triggering warning lights across the dashboard, an issue that could not be safely ignored. Running Bugatti's quadruple turbocharged W16 engine with an unresolved misfire is not a risk anyone serious about the car's long-term health would be willing to take, let alone anyone hoping to eventually push it toward 253 miles per hour. But perhaps the most dangerous fault of all was the quietest one, a tire pressure monitoring system error that threatened to do something none of the other problems could. At speeds approaching the Veyron's limit, Tire pressure is not a minor statistic. It is one of the single most important variables standing between a controlled run and a catastrophic failure. A malfunctioning TPMS did not just risk an inconvenient warning light. It risked blocking top speed mode from activating altogether. A built-in safeguard designed to prevent exactly the kind of run Armstrong was building toward. Solving it meant testing sensors individually, tracing wiring back through the wheel wells, and refusing to move forward until the system could be trusted completely. There was no shortcut available here, no workaround that wouldn't compromise safety. What makes a rebuild like this so exhausting is not any single fault. It is the sheer accumulation of them, one after another, each one arriving just as the last seemed finally resolved. Every technician who has spent real time inside a car this complex knows the feeling of chasing one gremlin only to have it lead, almost mockingly, straight into another. Each of these faults, on their own, might have been manageable, stacked one on top of another, across months of work. They formed a wall that seemed almost designed to keep the Veyron from ever reaching that runway at all. And yet, piece by piece, fault by fault, that wall began to come down. The moment everything finally worked. Somewhere in the middle of months of diagnostics, part replacements, and test drives, something remarkable started to happen. The warning lights began disappearing. Not all at once, and not without setbacks along the way, but steadily, fault by fault, the Veyron's dashboard began to look less like a list of unsolved problems and more like the display of a car that might actually be ready. Is there a more satisfying moment in any rebuild than watching the last warning light finally go dark?
Every light is on the dash.
And the engine light was flashing.
Don't sound good either.
We're running on a couple of cylinders.
The gearbox pressure issues were resolved through careful adjustment and testing, restoring confidence in a system that has to handle enormous forces without hesitation. The electrical gremlins, chased circuit by circuit, were finally traced to their sources and repaired for good, the blown fuse replaced, and the wiring behind it restored to full health. The engine misfire, once a serious concern hanging over the entire project, was diagnosed and corrected, allowing the W16 to run the way it was always meant to. And then there was the TPM's fault, the one problem standing directly between Armstrong and top speed mode itself. Solving it required exactly the kind of patience the rest of the rebuild had demanded. Testing, replacing, and verifying each sensor until the system reported clean, accurate readings across all four corners of the car. When that fault finally cleared, it did not just remove another item from a long list. It removed the very last obstacle standing between a rebuilt Veyron and the feature that had defined this entire project from the beginning. Months earlier, that key had been nothing more than a fabricated guess, a locksmith's best attempt at replicating a mechanism designed by people who never intended for it to be copied. Now, with every other fault resolved, it represented the final step, the one piece of hardware that would either prove the entire rebuild had been worth it, or reveal one more problem still waiting to be found. The moment arrived without ceremony, the way most genuinely important moments in a garage tend to. The key was inserted, and rather than resistance, rather than another fault code or another flashing warning light, the Veyron responded exactly as it was designed to. Top speed mode activated immediately. The car dropped closer to the ground. The aerodynamics shifted into their most aggressive configuration. Every system that had spent months causing frustration now worked together in perfect coordination, exactly as Bugatti's engineers had intended decades earlier. There was no fanfare in that garage, no crowd, no cameras beyond the ones already documenting the build. Just the quiet, unmistakable sound of a machine finally doing exactly what it was built to do, after months spent doing almost anything but. It would have been easy, at that moment, to declare the rebuild complete. The hardest mechanical puzzle had been solved. The most exclusive feature of one of the world's most exclusive hypercars now responded to a key built by hand in a workshop rather than one issued from Bugatti's own supply chain. But a garage is a controlled environment, forgiving in ways that an open runway simply is not. For a project defined by setbacks, this was the payoff months of work had been building toward. Proof that a repossessed, damaged Veyron could still become, mechanically speaking, exactly the car it was designed to be. How many hours of frustration, of chased faults and failed diagnostics, does it take to reach a single moment like this one? For Armstrong, the answer was measured not in hours but in months. And yet, watching the car lower itself into position exactly as intended, none of that time spent felt wasted. But activating top speed mode in a garage and proving it on a runway were two very different tests. A car can look perfect standing still under work lights, and still fail the moment real speed is asked of it. The car had passed the first test. Now it needed to survive the second. The final test ended in disaster. With top speed mode finally unlocked, there was only one place left to prove what the rebuild had actually achieved. A runway long enough and empty enough to let the Veyron stretch its legs without restriction. But that runway was not next door. Reaching it meant driving the car more than 150 miles.
A mechanic should always test drive the car before giving it to a customer. This is my first time ever driving a Chiron as well, and it's like this.
An extended real-world test that would either confirm months of repairs had actually worked, or expose a problem no amount of garage diagnostics had managed to catch. Every mile of that drive carried its own quiet tension. This was, after all, a car that had spent months revealing new faults just when everything seemed finally resolved. A gearbox issue, an electrical fault, a misfire, a sensor error. The pattern had repeated itself often enough that trusting the car completely required a certain leap of faith. And yet, mile after mile, the Veyron simply performed. No warning lights, no strange noises, no sudden loss of power. Just a rebuilt hypercar, behaving exactly the way it should. 150 miles is not a short distance to trust an unproven rebuild. It is hours of sustained running, of varying speeds and road conditions, of exactly the kind of real-world stress test that a garage full of diagnostic tools simply cannot replicate. Every mile that passed without incident quietly built the case that months of work had actually paid off. Arriving at the runway should have felt like a victory lap in itself. Isn't that supposed to be the hardest part? Getting the car this far, in one piece, with everything working. Armstrong's plan was never to chase the full 253 miles per hour on the very first attempt. Instead, this was to be a shakedown run, a controlled, gradual build-up designed to confirm the car's stability and reliability at increasing speeds before ever approaching its true limit. It was the responsible approach, the kind of careful, methodical thinking that had defined the entire rebuild up to this point. The car pulled away smoothly, speed building in a steady, confident climb. Everything about the run felt like the culmination of everything that had come before it. The scavenged bodywork, the homemade key, the months of chased electrical faults.
The only thing that we've actually needed to repair is the gearbox bracket.
It's weldable.
But from now onwards, it's going to get a lot harder, especially without Bugatti's help.
All of it converging into this single, controlled acceleration down a stretch of empty tarmac. And then, without warning, everything went wrong. The Veyron began losing power, its performance dropping off in a way that had nothing to do with the driver easing off the throttle. What had, moments earlier, been a car finally running exactly as intended began shutting down unexpectedly. The shakedown run cut short by a fault nobody had seen coming. Back in the garage, Diagnostics pointed toward a possible communication issue involving the fuel pump control module. A plausible explanation, but not a confirmed one. After everything the Veyron had already survived, after every gremlin already chased down and corrected, one more fault had appeared at the worst possible moment, on the very run meant to prove the rebuild had finally succeeded. Is there a crueler kind of failure than the one that arrives after everything else has already gone right? 150 miles of flawless driving, months of solved faults, a homemade key that worked exactly as designed, all of it building toward a single stretch of runway, only for something new and unexplained to bring the attempt to a halt before the car ever had the chance to show what it could really do. The exact cause remained unclear. The team left once again searching for answers in a car that had given up so few of them easily. A homemade key that outsmarted Bugatti's own safeguards. Months of gearbox trouble, electrical gremlins, and warning lights finally silenced one by one. 150 miles driven without a single fault. And then, on the one run that mattered most, the Veyron simply stopped. A fuel pump control module suspected, but nothing confirmed. That is the strange shape of this story. Not a clean win, not a total loss, just a car that keeps proving it can be saved, right up until the moment it proves how much work is still left to do. The diagnosis continues. The key still works, and this rebuild is far from finished.